Asian region is facing two very large-scale natural disasters. First, of course, the tropical cyclone and its after effects in Myanmar, and now this large earthquake here in China. But both countries have had very different responses in terms of handling the disaster at hand. Al Jazeera's Bernard Smith now takes a look at how and compares how both countries have handled the disasters.
Within hours of China's earthquake, Premier Wen Jiabao was on the scene, apparently taking charge of the recovery operation. Not long after Myanmar's cyclone, the country's ruling junta had a meeting far away from where the cyclone hit. Eventually, the generals were seen handing out boxes of aid to apparently grateful victims. The dramatic contrast in the way both governments have responded publicly to their disasters says much about how importantly they value public opinion. Both countries appeared slow to react to their disasters in the first couple of hours. First reports of the China quake came from seismologists in the US. Myanmar had reported 4 deaths from the cyclone. Premier Wen was in the quake-hit province within hours. The military had been mobilized, emergency aid flown in. From Myanmar, nothing. Only on day 3 after Cyclone Nargis hit did the world get an idea of the potential scale of the disaster. But the government of Myanmar resists calls to allow in aid workers. 8 days later, most of the country carried on with a constitutional referendum. By day 10, relief aid is still only trickling through. Officially 32,000 people are dead, but the UN estimates perhaps more than 100,000. Disasters, though, are a test for China's government. It has to be seen to be responding. Its mandate rests on maintaining order, delivering growth, and being able to handle emergencies. A more affluent and knowledgeable population expects more of its government. Myanmar's population is impoverished and has learned to expect little. The military controls the economy and takes the profits. So firm is its grip on power that it doesn't need to worry about public opinion. Bernard Smith, Al Jazeera.
All right, we're going to talk about this issue a little further now. We're joined by William Hess from Global Insight, based here in Beijing. Thanks very much for your time. How would you characterize the response that the Chinese authorities have had in comparison with the response in Myanmar to the disasters?
I think in a couple of simple words that the Chinese response has been pretty swift and decisive. They want to make sure that they can maintain their kind of crisis management credentials, whereas in Myanmar, I think the run-up to the recent constitutional referendum certainly complicated the political picture there and maybe made their response pretty muddled.
Obviously, the authorities in Myanmar have been accused of not being willing to accept outside help. Is it really any different in China, given that the response has largely been through the mechanism of the People's Army?
Well, I think certainly if China had the need for external assistance, they might be more willing to accept it. However, in this case, the Chinese infrastructure for dealing with this kind of crisis is much more developed than that in Myanmar. So, especially when it comes to infrastructure, both in terms of administrative resources and physical resources, China is in a better spot in this case.
I mean, do you think that there is any criticism that will be leveled at the Chinese authorities, given that lessons obviously were learned from the snowstorms a few months ago, but even still, there are areas that the soldiers are just not reaching?
Yeah, I think the geography in both cases is actually a big factor. Sichuan is a very mountainous region. Some of the areas are actually very hard to get to. So when you add, damage to roadways, things like that, it really makes it a difficult rescue picture for really any institution trying to get there.
I guess what we're talking about is in a sense hypothetical, because it seems that little will change the response that the Myanmar authorities are making. But if they had responded in the same way, or were able to respond in the same way that the Chinese authorities have had, what would be the difference now? Would we see a vastly different situation, do you think?
Possibly. I think that really the constitutional referendum in Myanmar really complicated the picture there, where you have different interest groups, one being the military junta, which is probably the best equipped organization to deal with this kind of crisis, trying to defend their own political credentials instead of dealing with this kind of crisis. So really a different scenario where China is really trying to reassure the world that in terms of its crisis management capabilities leading up to the Olympics. So different political pictures in both countries.
Is there a sense that international aid organizations, NGOs, need to learn lessons from the reaction that they get in countries, particularly in Asia, where there is perhaps a fear of the association NGOs have with other countries, particularly Western countries?
I think looking at the response in the government in Myanmar, they're really concerned about any kind of meddling in the politics that might accompany aid. In China, I think the situation is a little bit different, but still they want to make sure that they're in charge and they're maybe willing to accept the aid behind the scenes from, say, the International Red Cross, other big, large multilateral groups. However, they want to make sure that still both countries want to make sure that they're seen as the leaders and in charge of the situation.
William Hess from Global Insight, thank you very much for your time.